still, of course, do not know any of you personally, but until further notice, until I find out otherwise, I am delighted with the feel of all of this. Delighted to find you, but people involved with this are always delighted to find other people who seem to be reasonably intelligent. Right now we'll leave it at being mystical, that all of you feel sort of as a group all right thus far. And in that sense, I wish I could go ahead and tell you everything there is to know immediately. But I can't, because even the people that I've known many years, I can't tell. It's a matter that once I get to know you, I can try to tell you things that are closer to where you are. But it all becomes sort of a matter of connecting dots, because what this is about, the experience, is not to be described. There's no shortage of that. The danger, the most operational danger, is to start describing, such as most so-called mystical systems you ever heard of, and obviously religions, when they describe what the payoff is, what the kingdom of God, or what the reuniting with the center of the universe, or back in the arms of Allah, they will describe it in detail. And if for no other reason, what it does is ruin it. Because we're sitting here meeting as a group. I would not be doing it did I not have a group of people. I would not be out doing it one-on-one. But even though we're meeting here as a group, let me remind you of one thing. Do not ever, no matter what the group is, including this one, do not ever underestimate the desire for humans to want to be dominated, controlled, and led. Now, I know that varies, and there's some of you that probably would prefer to be staying up here on the stage. Maybe it usually happens that maybe somebody shows up that considers that they're a spy or going to find out secrets so they can go out and start some kind of new cult somewhere. So I know that some of you would deny that you want to be dominated and led around. And it varies. But I'm just saying that humans, the same as every other mammal, every other family, pack-oriented animal, there is a desire. If for no other reason, look at it this way. Why are you here? Taking the absolute worst verbal view, why are you here? And you could say, well, I wanted to learn something. I thought maybe you knew something I didn't. That sounds nice. But if you were an absolute, if you were, as they call it in zoology, if you were an absolute, dyed-in-the-wool, irretractable alpha male wolf or chimpanzee, you wouldn't be here. It would be sort of on the basis of, all right, if there is a secret, I'm going to find out what it is or die. And if somebody else knows, I'd cut my throat before I'd ask somebody else. I'm not going somewhere and let somebody tell me what it is. I'm exaggerating, of course, but I'm telling you, don't ever underestimate that. And part of what I do is take that into account is, it is so easy. People start leaning. And you can start off believing that you have extraordinary desires and aims, and that you could even, I bet if I suddenly said, well, let's run around the room right quick and tell me, have you ever been part of some kind of cult or weird group? And even if you had, since I put it that way, everybody'd go, no. But do not ever underestimate. And don't look around, just keep an eye on yourself. I'll be doing it, but keep an eye on yourself. People want to be led. How do you explain governments? How do you explain religions? How do you explain the whole social fabric? People attempt to describe it locally, and they pick out personal anecdotes that they think have something to do with them personally and individually. It is simply the desire to be dominated, to be led around, to be told what to do. This sort of thing, this kind of activity, whatever it be called, cannot be, it is not correctly presented on the basis of preaching. It cannot, that is not the proper presentation. And by proper, I mean operational, acceptable, the true presentation. You cannot do it on the basis of preaching to people, because I am not here to tell you what you should do. The only thing I can tell you is what you might do. Because to tell you what you should do, then you're part of the collective herd of humanity. You do not really need a more specialized wolf pack or a chimpanzee family somewhere, because the world is full of people telling you what you should do life itself through the general web of the collective level of consciousness I was drawing for you. Even if you do not hear it daily on the basis of someone, a priest or a rabbi, your mother, or the president, they're out there, but if you don't tune in, the radios and television, even if you don't think that daily someone is telling you what you should do, consider this. Operating at your ordinary level, do you not always feel sort of guilty about being alive? If you're saying you do, you may not notice it any longer, you may not put those words on it, because you continually feel, properly so, at the common level of consciousness, that you should be doing something in addition to what you are, doing something other than you're doing. So in other words, there is no shortage. As soon as Ken and Barbara were driven from the Garden of Eden, the first thing that God handed them when they left, besides their pink slip, maybe a road map, a one-way ticket, was he handed them a piece of paper that says, what you should have done. So then the rest of whatever is actually included in the Old Testament about go out and now you're cursed and you're going to have to work for a living and punch a time clock. But the point was, the reason you people are cursed is you didn't do what you should. This cannot be presented. It is never presented, whether it was me, and I'm saying me because I'm the only one here. But it has never been presented. It cannot be. That is not the presentation. The struggle to be more conscious, the struggle to do this thing, cannot be preached. And it's not my job to preach, because there's nothing for me to tell you should be doing. It's just not possible. Which right there can really separate the weekend would-be mystics from the real ones, because you continue to wait. And I've looked at the questions. Whether I get to them or not, we will. I take them very seriously. No, I've looked. And some of them, if you noticed, those of you to whom it may be applicable, last time and tonight, even if I do not read it, your question, I will touch on it, because it is, after reading them, has influenced what I was going to talk about, but I would plan to get to all of them, to at least read them out and say something. And also several people's mentioned about they hope their question wasn't stupid after what I said the first night. That was sort of a little something I can probably point to you now. There's only one kind of stupid question, that's which usually people would have asked, and I did get a few, but the kind that came in since then, you don't have to apologize for being stupid except if it's on this basis. And you're not apologizing to me. It should be to yourself if you ask a question that has no pertinence to you, to anybody, unless you're just ordinary. If you're going to ask a question like, how can I get rich? That's a stupid question. But it's stupid to ask me. It's not that maybe I don't have an opinion, but I got no interest in it, so I'm not going to give you any. Or to ask, how can I talk to the dead? I'm just starting to pull out the kinds of things that might normally be perceived to be of some, whatever your background may have been, that you might have thought you're interested in such as that. That is a stupid question. Because even if you could talk to the dead, what the hell are they going to tell you? If they knew anything, they wouldn't be dead. Plus, they're not dead. Life is still alive, and so whatever part of it that you could benefit from is still alive. At any rate, a stupid question. Now, I told you that I was not going to, after that first night, if you recall the little something, I said I'd take questions, and I asked Worth to come out and point out that I didn't want any stupid. I didn't respond to stupid or personal questions, and of course by then I had assumed that some of you had already put your note up here and perhaps felt a bit hesitant to come up and take it back, like they'd admit that you asked a stupid question. A stupid question is simply think about it. It's not by my definition. You ask a question that even if there seemed to be some validity to it, or even if I knew the answer, and the point is you should very quickly get to the place to where you could think of the kind of questions that you might have thought heretofore would be of extreme significance. But very shortly, you should get to the point that you could ask yourself rhetorically, all right, if I knew the answer to that, how would I benefit? Can you spell N-O-N-E? Like, can you talk to the dead? Are there people on other planets? Well, what if they are? So what? You understand that sort of thing? Or especially questions, do you believe so-and-so? Of course, you addressed it to me, but it was also addressed to you. Because when you ask me or anybody else, do you believe so-and-so? You're not asking them if they believe. You're not asking for information. You're saying, well, here's something stupid that I believe in. Do you happen to agree? You know? Or perhaps can you furnish any supporting evidence so I would not feel so stupid? It is not my job to make you feel less stupid. It's my job to point things you can do to be less stupid if you want to. But I'm not saying you should. All right. The whole idea of, I assume by now that you people know, I have yet to ask what your background was. But the whole idea from yoga to Zen to Sufism to, I've been using the word mysticism, which really should cover the Christian Judaic form of mysticism, but the whole idea of being awake to a higher state of consciousness, the Buddha's idea of enlightenment, some of the yoga and Tibetan ideas of liberating the mind in some way, freeing oneself. All of that is the exact same thing. It is the same thing whether you're an Indian, Chinese, Tibet, Italian, Venezuelan, whoever you are, it becomes the same thing. The experience, anyone who describes it to you, even if they had ever had a taste of it, now no longer know what it is, or they wouldn't do it, and they're doing you a disservice, and now you're doing yourself a disservice to take it seriously. And having said all that, there are still things you can do that we're going to get to, but I'm going to tell you point blank how not to ever do it. Guaranteed that the rest of the things, when I start telling you positive things you can do, it's still a matter of connect the dots, because there is no magic pill. There is no one thing that everyone can do. Now, there might be something that we might talk about that you might finally do, and it would seem that that might be the thing that just sort of pushed you over, and you suddenly have the Homer Simpson experience of somebody in the old group gave me that one instead of the Buddha, Satori, and aha, and enlightenment is, I won't try to do it, but it's like, my God, I never realized that. I'm not going to describe that, because as I said, for one thing, then you think, well, it'd be like running a trip. To use my story of the Orient Express, to use Istanbul as being the final destination of an exotic place never experienced, like the Enlightenment. If I started describing it to you, if I'd been there, and I described it in detail, without any doubt, I understand this, it could be very intriguing. You think, God, boy, wow, whoo. But do you understand? It's got several possibilities. One is, if you read travel books, it can almost stop you from traveling. Looked at another way, as always, if you're an ordinary person and want to save a few bucks, that can be used. To wit, for instance, you can subscribe to the most expensive, last time I noticed, sailing magazines. You don't even have to buy books, but like $30 a year, these fancy, slick things, and that's pretty high price. Right? It used to be $30 a year. But my God, if you can just look at it and look at all the pictures, save yourself the trouble of trying to save up $200,000 or $300,000 for a good 30-footer. That's one way to use it if you're ordinary. But the danger, well, I'm deciding it's a danger, that's why I'm not going to do it to you. It's to describe Istanbul in any kind of degree, because for one thing, you can think, well, geez, you wouldn't analyze it this way, but it would be like, well, hey, I met a guy that apparently has been there, and it was just so neat. Next thing you know, it's just like you figure you'll hang around me, and maybe it'll rub off, or maybe I'll talk about it again. The other one is, it will color the experience itself, which, that is, assuming sometime that you find yourself almost in a state, an Istanbul state of mind. You find yourself in an expanded state of consciousness. And if I had been drilling, me or anybody, but if I had been just drilling you constantly about, how great it is, trying to talk you into it so that you'd stick with me, and I'd have a new pack of dogs and followers, and I keep on, boy, just wait till you get there, which is the basis of somebody else doing it, that and their stupidity, then it's going to color your experience. That is, when I say color, it's going to distract from it, which somewhat off the subject, but is also one of the, not the primary, but one of the drawbacks of those of you that's had psychedelic experiences, is because they are so random, they are not an individual phenomenon, that someone has to talk to you about it to begin with, and sure enough, assuming the trip wasn't real bad, you'll end up having a trip similar to whoever talked you into it, whoever your buddy was that said, here, try this. The first time, if any of you ever took, mushrooms and LSD and et cetera, any psychedelic drug, and they say, hey, when I did it, it was so great. Especially, I got the same mushrooms I went and found from this guy down in Arizona that I know. And let me tell you, and they describe you get sick, you pass out, and then you come to, and then suddenly I was floating over the earth, and that lasted, oh, I don't know, maybe an hour, maybe half a night. But then suddenly I just rose so far up that I looked down, it was not the earth, it was like this big black hole, and there was this face, and I realized it was a cell in my, they tell you something like that, and sure as hell, if you don't have a bad trip, you'll end up having something very similar, which may have been fun. I mean, because you can have fun getting drunk, getting a fight or something. But as far as you understanding something from that, you understand you came back, and your buddy may have said, huh, after you came down. Was it like I said? And sure as hell, talk about serendipity, talk about fortuitousness, you think it was. Every Christian that has a mystical experience sees Jesus. Every Jew that has a mystical experience comes back and says, my God, it was Abraham or Moses. Kind of figures, doesn't it? Because that's all they ever heard about. But I'm going to tell you how not to have it before we ever get around to doing the kinds of things that would seem more positive. And this is positive, because I'm going to tell you that which you've never heard put this directly. I'll tell you exactly how never to have any sort of extraordinary change of consciousness, any extraordinary insight into life. I'll tell you how positively never to have it, and that is this. It's to let your mind run on as it is now. That's it. If some of you, I guess I'll be a little funny again, if any of you had the immediate Homer Simpson potential, even that should have the, I'm saying not should, that I was expecting it, but you might go away and think about it. It covers everything. There's no exception, and I'm not playing with words. There is no such thing as any other state of consciousness. As long as you just let your mind run on and ramble as it is now. And I say ramble, I don't mean that in a specifically pejorative manner. Just however your mind operates now. Just let it run on, and I guarantee you, you'll never experience anything extraordinary. You'll never understand any more about life than you understand right this second. Nothing. Now, consider, I've had several questions in here, by the way, people asking about the term new intelligence and etc. I did not even make up the term. I just turned it over to the older group, and they came up. Every time we think up a name, I get to where I just tell them to do it, because it doesn't really matter that much. And I can always depend on them to come up with something that I can live with. But I could have almost lived with, they could come up with the Southeastern International Baking Company, or it's just a little harder to advertise underneath it. Then you got to say, I guess, for you pastry lovers who also enjoy things mystical, it just. But the idea of new intelligence, as soon as I heard the term, they asked me before they used it, and I said, that's fine. I thought about it, and it is as good as any. But to remind you again, a man is not simply his mind, and this is not simply a matter of intelligence. It is not a matter simply of the intellect, except for this. It damn near is. Because there is not a physical method, there is no combination of physical methods to directly work upon changing one's consciousness. That being true is why, at the public level, the readily accessible level, as always, as you're going to catch on, I'll point out, and you'll begin to see, as always, since it can't happen, that's exactly what is presented. And I don't mean it's conspiracy, and I don't mean that they're stupid, but since they do not know how to do it, since life does not turn out this information that just kind of seeps out here and there in individuals, it's not part of the general blanket and evolution of humanity in particular time and place, then what little pieces come up are what I've referred to weekend mystics, people that just have it sort of as a hobby. They are the ones that will take that which will not work or is extremely inefficient, such as any physical assault on consciousness. There's nothing you can do physically to make yourself more conscious, but as I pointed out sort of to you people last time, there are things that you can do to hinder it. In the same way, there's nothing you can do to extend your life, but you can damn sure cut it shorter. That's no problem. But there's nothing you can do. You can eat vitamins until you choke, and you're going, assuming you don't do anything else to kill yourself early, you're going to die on schedule. You may be real healthy. But in that same line, there is nothing directly to do physically, such as fasting, such as meditating, such as just sitting, such as just standing on one foot until you petrify. But there are things that you can do that will certainly keep you from it, such as constantly staying stoned, drinking, mistreating the body to the point that it distracts. But throughout all of this, through everything you've ever heard of, the reason I went ahead and abided the term new intelligence, when it comes down to the experience itself, everyone feels it here in the same way. Those of you that have had some psychedelic drug experience, or even those of you that may have had something without drugs that you really understood more, that something happened. You do feel it here. Now, it certainly makes you feel better physically and etc. As I said, everything being fairly equal and you being, we'll assume, not genetically severely impaired right this minute, if you're just ordinary, you're supposed to feel fairly good anyway. So it's not a matter that the body suddenly takes on superhuman attributes, which I can refer you again, is the popular belief within publicly known mysticism that's the first stories, that a Jesus or a Moses or some figure, that the first thing he becomes enlightened, he gets in touch with greater powers of some kind, and what's the first thing he can do? Walk on water, fly, raise the dead, turn a cheap suit into a real nice designer. It's always physical magic. It's always something physical, and not just magic out there, it's apparently magic in him that suddenly, or he becomes immortal. It's not so. It's simply, if you believe that, then you're back to a stupid question. That even if it were true, what good does it do you? Even if it were true that that had happened to somebody, what good does that do you other than a hobby, other than something just to imagine and speculate about? So even though I said it's not simply an intellectual affair, it damn near is, as far as trying to describe it. Because, I repeat again, it's just, you can try to weasel your way out of this, there is nothing you can actually do directly, physically, to affect consciousness, positively. There are things you can do continually, right this second. You can affect consciousness by the way you sit. Now, you can affect your awareness. I mean, you may not think it is in terms of consciousness itself, but you affect the attention if you start slouching, etc., which very easily turns into forms of meditations, a Zen, that they'll say, aha. If we had a nice Zen monk here, an ordinary one, he'd say, aha, so you step your foot in it. You said it wouldn't work. You said it didn't help. Is everybody getting used to this? I can play both parts at one time. I'll say that I'm talking to an ordinary person. I feel like maybe I should say that before you think that. I guess you filled in the rest before you thought I was completely bonkers. But anyway, I could have a Zen monk, you understand, jump in right now and say, wait a minute. To me, you're just saying just the opposite of what you just said, because that's the very reason we sit, and it's so important to posture and take the position, because it keeps attention, correct. Yeah, it does. But it won't wake you up. It won't give you enlightenment, but they're correct. It is at least taking away one of the possible forms of distraction. But it alone, so the point is, at any particular moment, you don't have to be drinking your own drugs. You can be doing that, which distracts. You can be doing that physically, which is distracting from the possibility of doing something up here. You ate the wrong food before you got here. You ate too much. You drank too much coffee. You didn't have enough sleep. All that. But also notice that there are whole forms of would-be mysticism based on no more than that, such as correct posture. And that's one of the Western versions, translations of Zen schools, that many of the ones are considered now historically, assuming if you've done just cursory readings, or maybe you consider in-depth readings, but it's like you go to a school and they say, all right, if we let you in, we go in there and sit. Go in there and sit on the bench with everyone else. We sit 12 hours a day, and if we have anything to say to you, we'll let you know. And that you may go there and sit 20 years, and nobody ever says a word to you, which gives all kinds of would-be weekend warriors little shivers, like, God, wouldn't that be great? To be able to do that, or to Of course, the real shiver is think, what if you sold everything and went somewhere and decided that that's where I want to be, as such and such monastery, and you got there, and you told them, I've sold everything, left my family, wrecked my life, here I am. And they'll go, okay, you can go in there and sit, get in the back. We sit 14 hours, 20 hours a day in your case, and if we ever have anything to say to you, we'll tell you. And they walk off. The shiver is, what if I did that, and I got there, and it was like that? Because the thing is, I'd have to get up and leave. Or you're not sure what. The shiver is also, I started, it's sort of a shiver of recognized stupidity. That you have done that which was unnecessary. You have done that became potentially self-defeating. Back to, throughout all of the known forms of would-be activity, from the Far East to the Europe and now brought over to here in different forms, there have been things directly connected to what I gave you as a backhand approach of how not to ever affect what you understand. That was to let your mind go as it is now. And you notice it's a nice succinct statement. There are no conditions, no asterisks, no parentheticals, such as someone saying, wait a minute, you mean and let my mind go as it is now if I am lacking in education? No. If I am Lithuanian? No. If I am short? No. So there are no exceptions. It doesn't matter how your mind's going. If you let it go like it's going now, I guarantee nothing will ever happen. But it's not that you should change, and it's not that I'm going to tell you what to think any more than I tell you what you should do. No one involved with this has ever told people what to do. They have to die, assuming that those kind of people even live, and then it has to be taken over by people making a living out of it, and then it becomes rules and regulations. But I assure you, at the time, they didn't tell anybody what they should do. They told people who were interested what they could do, what they might do, what was possible for some people. And also, they did not, and I am not, here to tell you what to think. Because there's nothing particular what to think. It's to tell you how you can think for the first time independently, that's supposed to strike some of you as interesting, and then you might think, well, how? But see, I already told you how. I told you the way to start. It's whatever you do, don't let your mind go on as it is now. Throughout all the forms, all the way from the Far East, I said, throughout the history, you have had all these groups with the ways that the best known probably is. It's doing something. Well, you've all heard of some of them, or all of them. Some of the would-be apparent mystical schools would teach that you should count every breath you take once you undertake this mystical path, once you undertake this great secret work and struggle, is you should begin to count to yourself each and every breath. And if you lose count, you have to start all over. Now, I knew somebody, I understand, laugh. It's not really funny. Think about it. Well, unless you find being stupid funny. It is kind of humorous, but no sense we should go into that. I just did that to make you feel better. Or another version is simply to be aware of every breath. Other versions was to count the infinite names of God with each and every breath. To count the infinite number of virtues of Buddha. To count the number of arms on Vishnu when he was or she was in really good form. But you understand, or to repeat, when you get into the Christian world, because it wasn't all mystical. It wasn't all Far Eastern exotic mystical, because you've had Western forms of attempted mysticism, of attempt to just continually repeat the name of God, or to continually repeat the Lord's Prayer. Do you know what all that's involved with? It's an attempt to interfere with the way your mind is now running. That's it. Now, ordinary people who may have heard that, people who have even attempted to pursue it under the guise of some mystical activity, as always, which is one of the dangers, they become entangled in the word. They become entangled in the description. That if it says, well, now here's what you should do, they would always be involved. And when it would be operating on the basis of this kind of attempted method, but always also be involved with rules and regulations as to what you should be doing in altering your behavior. They're inseparable. That is, they would tell you to either quit eating meat, and if you say, I'm a vegetarian already, if they had their wits about them real quick, they'd go, in your case, start eating meat. They'd tell you to change the way you sleep, put your head south, or go to bed early. They'd tell you a few things like that, and then if you say, well, I want the real inside thing, and they go, all right, here it is. Repeat with each breath you take, every time you inhale, say, God is great, and when you exhale, say, God have mercy. I could have said Allah, I could have said Buddha, so don't get, but you understand, if you had gone there, in your case, the way things work with humans, it would have probably been more attractive had you gone to the other side of the world or found a Hindu or Buddhist priest that came here, and instead of God, since most of you grew up around that, it said, say with each inhalation, Allah is great, and every time you exhale, may Allah have mercy on me. And that would sound more exotic. But you would still become entangled, as they are, or they wouldn't tell you that. They cannot separate the words from what the intent is. And you can say, as long as you want to, they have decent, good intentions. Good intentions do not mean anything to someone attempting to do this, because life has good intentions. You make a great mistake to think that life's got it in for you, or that life is not fair. Life has the best intentions in the world, or you would not be here. None of us would be here. But good intentions do not mean anything about accomplishing this. And to say that to pass off that people will tell you things to do, which I point out, and some of you should already know, do not seem to have the effect. Or else you tried them and you decided that something was missing or that you didn't do it correctly. The descriptions are almost an inescapable snare that you say, remember the name of God, remember, count each breath. They'll always have some backup story as to why this should be done. And as long as you're looking on the basis that I should be doing this, and the words themselves are important, the descriptions, the method is important, it's a game. There's nothing wrong with it, but it is not what this is about. In case I hadn't mentioned in the last 5 minutes, which is also what makes it so tricky and apparently vague and non-specific to hear about. Because you keep saying, well, I want to hear, by God, get down to it. Of course, I have been getting down to it. It just doesn't sound like it. It's dots. You got to connect them all, really. What people, back as I point out, I'm not going to stop on it now because it's not a sermon to tell you that there's, I'm sure that some of you, regardless of what I've said thus far, including tonight, there's a very good likelihood that some of you are involved with activities of other kinds that involve some specific physical rituals, demands, and you're so accustomed to it, or for whatever reason you might right now be saying that I'm not correct, that you find favor with it, you enjoy it, and etc. I didn't say you should stop. I'm telling you, and you'll soon see it if you keep sticking around and try some of this, which should be a relief, by the way, that there is nothing physically to directly go from here that actually pushes consciousness. You can only do that which will hinder a change, but there's nothing to actually go do. Which, as I said, anybody who's been involved with such as that, it should come once you see it, not just because I tell you necessarily, but come as a relief to understand, well, at least I can devote my attention somewhere rather than this, because it becomes simply a habit. And it does not actually change consciousness. So it appears to happen up here is what I'm telling you. If you've read enough, all the descriptions appear to be there. Used to, they'd say things like happen in a man's soul and his spirit and etc. At least you get hung up in those kinds of translations. Consider this. Where's a man's soul? Where's a man's spirit? Where's his heart? Vis-a-vis his lungs, his stomach, and the rest of his gross parts. There's only one other thing. And it's people do not know actually where to isolate it. But that is where consciousness changes. That's where the experience happens. So then we're left with, in English, words like intelligence and think. Now, that's not all it is, but that is the only place you can work on it. It is the only efficient place. if we did not have an intellect, there'd be no such thing as enlightenment. Because, as I'm sure some of you have taken notice, you do not find, for instance, you do not find cows in the barnyard in the zazen sitting position. You do not find pigs involved with whirling around and chanting the name of God and wearing pointed hats. No animal is involved with attempting to better themselves. No animal, you cannot make an animal, you can make them submit, some of them, like dogs. You can make them submit. They think you're just a bigger dog. I know some of you think, well, my dog loves me, right? He's afraid of you. But any other animal, you can't look at an animal. You cannot take any animal, a snake, a rhino, and go, bad rhino. You should not be out here tramping up this nice field, etc. Bad. I assume you know not to do that. Not up close. There is no such thing as any form of enlightenment. There is actually no such thing as even the appearance, the attempt to change, whether it be possible or not. But there's not even the attempt. There's no creature. There's no creature of which you can be aware. No plant. There's nothing on this planet that is apparently trying to change its behavior. And as I said, if you need any doubt, if you never thought about it, just go out, forget your dog. Just go out and find a worm, a flower, but get a baboon, which is another story that psychology, I don't know why I should bore you, but go out and say, bad baboon. Try to housebreak a baboon. Try to housebreak a wolf. There is no animal that feels as though it should change. So we're back to what I'm saying is this. And so let's talk about, just call it thinking for the time being. When I said that I can guarantee you, I'll tell you how not to ever understand anything more than you do now, how to never experience anything extraordinary, and that is to let your mind run as it do now. Or for those of you with high school education, does now. Man does not so much think as trail along after what you just thought, which is the form that I pointed out to you, I think, the first night. If you think that there's not anything extraordinarily possible, and I cannot prove this, and this is not a sermon because I can say it again, and if you still don't hear it, there's no way I can prove it to you. It's just a matter of whether you hear it or not. That it should be enough to tell any man the most humanistic, the most non-spiritual, the most everyday, hard-nosed, civilized, intellectual man on this planet, a man who would scoff at any idea of anything extraordinary, a man who would scoff at religion, a man who just says life is what it appears to be, as you're making money and getting along. That kind of man, if he could hear this, if he could tolerate it, even he would admit something is strange if I say, what you just told me about life is just to be led physically? He went, yeah. And I say, when did you plan to tell me that? What are you going to say next? Men cannot tell you. Men do not know what is running life, but notice none of you suddenly fell into a swoon and reached Buddhahood. But once you hear that the first time for yourself and realize it, it will take you can forget hoping that Bette Midler shows up in a mystical dream. It'll take the wind out from under your wings. When you see for yourself that you have lived this whole life, passed for being pretty intellectual, perhaps even have a small group of would-be mystics, people that look to you for enlightenment and to get a new book, and you sit around and describe it to them, and to suddenly realize that you have lived here 20, 30, 40 years passing for being not just intelligent, but perhaps down there mystical or insightful, and you have never actually had a thought in your life. Not you. And it's a simple proof. Tell yourself what you're going to say next. Now, men have been trying to explain this for as long as they've been thinking. I can make up versions. The stages of men attempting, the stages of men searching for that which is controlling them. And they start off, I'll give you a quick history. One version, they start off and they call it nature. Then they call it gods, and they call it kings, and they call it tyrants, and they call it conspiracies, and they call it social dynamics. And probably the last one still now is then they call it their unconscious mind. They are all the same thing. Whether you believe that there is an international banking or communist conspiracy, or that there's a group of 12 old wise men that keep passing the mantle around, that's actually running all the affairs of man, whether you believe that there is an old man living up in the sky, good old Jehovah, or if you believe, if you would say, well, no, I'm more up to date, and I am more in line with 20th century psychology. It's all in the same boat. It's stupid and it's not stupid. If you're ordinary, it seems to explain things. If you're just an ordinary person, you at least look at it as being some progress vis-a-vis, let's say that you had grandparents or even parents that were fanatically religious, and you feel as though that you have progressed beyond that, that you don't see life, you don't see humanity as being driven and living under some curse from an angry God somewhere. You look at the kinds of conflicts and the problems that men have not as being a spiritual affliction, but from being holdover traumas from subconscious blows and pains and arrows that you have long since forgotten to experience. At the ordinary level, that sounds like progress. That's stupid. Well, it's stupid to consider that's progress, because what is it? How is that progress from believing, what if we were back 2,500 years ago in downtown Athens, not Georgia, Greece, and people were talking about it, assuming they took it seriously. It's hard to imagine that they were as stupid as some people now, but we'll let that go. And they're discussing the latest exploit that somebody says that Zeus just pulled on somebody, or some trick that Apollo slipped down and stole somebody's paycheck and blamed it on a neighbor, or tried to seduce somebody's wife, or they got mad at a neighbor down the street and made him turn into a serial killer. And they blame it on Apollo, and you go, boy, you know, we've gone past that. And you could also say, ordinary humanity does say this, intellectual, educated people. In other words, the collective consciousness of man would say that we have not only gone past that, obviously, but somebody circa 1995, some contemporaneous intellectual, some ordinary person can say, we have even gone past the idea, alongside mythological gods, into the idea of literal gods, that I am no longer tied to any organized religion. I don't believe that there's a God outside the system, some vengeful power that is looking over the affairs of man. I do not believe that. But they know this. They know that they're not controlling their life. And so what's the explanation now? And if you never think about it, it seems just smooth as buttermilk. Well, it's not God. You know, and some people, that's part of the idea of agnosticism, is kind of say, well, I don't fool with it. And so, but we don't even need that, because what we've got to see now, we have new explanations. We have new paradigms and matrices of the life of man that we see now by Freud and those who followed, that things happen that were so painful, that were so shocking, things that were so, that we were not prepared to cope with, etc. Psychological traumas that we had to suppress and we cannot remember them, and so therefore we can't, you know, they're down there somewhere in here. We just can't remember them now, but that does not mean that they do not work their wiles on us. That does not mean they do not have an effect. And you hear it and you think, by God, I like it. Especially if you don't go to church, you know, pay money and go to temple or whatever. It's like you hear this and go, I like it. It's like you can stay home and you don't have to fool anything. But now there's a new explanation of what? Why? I have no idea why I do what I do. But at least I'm up to date now in my stupidity. Besides my dramatic pseudo-sarcasm, do you understand though? That is exactly the position. You can take whoever right now is considered the world's leading authority in the field of psychology, whoever it is. You understand that he has no idea what drives man. None. He's got no more idea than the Pope does. He's got no more idea than your uncle does, if he's fairly sane. None. And therefore, they keep having to find a description. And the latest one, it's always been hanging around here and there, but the latest one now is considered to be damn near a science. It's past the point of simply speculative art, but it's almost a science. That is, of psychology. That it is understandable. We've got to dig more. We especially need more statistics. We need more clinical study to explain why people do what they do. Look at them in there in the lab, the people who are watching. And the psychologist never goes, why am I doing this? Why am I talking like, why am I pointing? Or it's a good thing that I can't do magic or don't choose to, and I suddenly leaped into his consciousness, the world's leading psychologist. And I go, how can you stand there and do that? How can you write these books and go out and make all these speeches? And worse than that, how can you live? Because you're fairly intelligent. I can look here in your brain, having this power, and I see there's nothing wrong up here. You got the gray stuff. You're decent. You don't drink. You're not on drugs. How can you keep living in an absolute dream? How can you keep it's what they call lying? How can you keep saying that, well, now we're getting closer and closer to what makes men work? And I grab him and I go, don't keep pointing out there. Don't keep pointing at the people you're studying. Don't keep pointing at your patients. Don't keep pointing at the students that's constituting this latest survey. Don't do that. Of course, that's not going to work, you understand. I'm making this up. And I ask him, don't do all that. Tell me, that is, tell you and I right quick. What are you going to say next? The point being, those few who can see it, all it does is give you the immediate shock, pleasant if you're the correct type, that you are absolutely, totally, unconditionally under no control of which you can identify. None. And the simple fact, you don't need, if you can see it, you do not need the likes of me to wield all kinds of strange stories about their God somewhere and they're hidden, or the people on other planets that now have some kind of magnetic ray guns that are making us behave. People love that kind of shit. I mean, well, how else do you explain religion's still here? Because you look around and you think you're a decent person. You think, well, life's going downhill, obviously, because look, people over in Africa, people in Bosnia, people wherever, whatever the latest, people, look what they're doing. Or look in our own neighborhoods. A man kills all of his family in their sleep. How can they do that? Defined, isolated, defined under the basis of, I refer to them normally as personal anecdotes. That is, it's an isolated and go, how can they do that? You know, don't do that. Not if you want to understand. Don't do that and say, how can they do that? They're out of control. And so you're accustomed to it. Whoever said that, let's say it's somebody, not you, let's say it's somebody stands up, a nice person with a suit and tie and maybe a priest or a rabbi or a political commentator. And somebody says, and they show you these photographs of the movies of people slaughtered and little children dying. And they go, how can humans do that? And you go, that's true. That's just inexplicable. No, it's not. Well, it's inexplicable if you really think you want to understand something about life and you can't understand the fact that that's not inexplicable. Well, let's get our inexplicables in order. The first inexplicable is, how do you go around thinking that you know what you're doing? One of the ways that humans do it, without analyzing it obviously in this way, is by finding isolated examples. That is, examples wherein others, by any reasonable civilized standard, do not know what they're doing. Which is normally, as a great one, is just, well, it's some kind of mass madness. There's even subfields in psychology used to be the study of mob psychology. Like a whole bunch of people get together and do something stupid, and you can just hear the term. Maybe a psychologist comes on and says, well, I can tell you what's happened over there. They've been undertaken. It's a very well-known phenomenon to psychologists, and we'll be glad to share it with your viewing audience. It's that sometimes crowds will get together, a whole mob, or sometimes damn near a whole country, and they will act in ways that individually they would not. It is a form of mass insanity. And it sounds, you think, well, because somebody gave an answer. A guy with a suit, a guy with a name that says Dr. So-and-so, lists his books, and he says, there it is. And plus it sounds like, It's the idea of an individual's unconscious mind simply writ larger, just a bigger story, because that does not explain anything. You're still left with, well, why do they do that? But let's get our, like I said, our inexplicables first. If you've got any interest in such as this, or understand what's going on in life, the first inexplicable is, what the hell am I doing? Listen to all this. Not me, but all this about life. Like, well, why do people act this way? No. First things first. What are you going to think next? What are you going to say next? Tell me that, and then we'll go into the rest of this. Then I'll explain the injustice of life. I will. Of course, as soon as you can do that, you'll go, never mind. Well, by then, you'll hate to see me waste my time. You go, no, got it. But I will. If you'll tell me that, I'll answer any question you want, such as, where do we go when No. Well, see, some of you, I'm afraid, well, never mind. Well, it's bad enough to give people the blues when they're alive, but then to make them think, you mean in death I got that? Look, it's a little joke, folks. What normally passes for thinking is not thinking. And there is no, I'm not telling you it should be different, and I'm not telling you that there is anything specific to identify and say, well, that kind of thinking is bad. To someone attempting to be more conscious, there's only one kind of thinking bad, and that's thinking that's a waste of time. Or more directly, stupid thinking. And anything that you think without any attention given to it is stupid. Not because I say so, but you simply ask yourself, well, what good has it done me? Being broken up the way consciousness is, you don't realize that what you've thought this for. You can say, well, I've read 2,000 books, or I've done all this and done all that, and you do not realize you can't stand to think about it, that you keep thinking the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over. And it's a simple question to say, well, is everything that you ever thought up until now, every book you read, every lecture you ever heard, has it changed anything? And unless you are irreversibly stupid, the answer is no. You could say, well, it's not pleasant to face up to, wasted thousands of dollars on books and et cetera. What the hell? Let them bury them, throw them in the casket with you if that makes you feel better. But you've got to realize that the way the mind runs, as it runs now, whoever you are, it will stop you from anything. Because you're not supposed to change. There's nothing wrong. And therefore, to think, well, this is an indictment of the way I think, no. Because I'm not telling you what you should do. I'm going to tell you what it's possible to do. But whatever you're thinking now, that's all that's possible for you. And there is nothing to change about it. There is nothing untoward about it. I'm going to arbitrarily change the subject since it's still my intention to stop it after 1 hour with you people. Which that's one good thing about this. You can just arbitrarily start all over and do all this. And at least it's not like you think, well, wait a minute, I lost the continuity. Well, I'll put it to you this way. If you feel like you did lose the continuity, another little joke. So I was going to say, you better watch it. I was mentioning about the group and about why you people, because there are questions in here, what the hell do you want out of us, or why doing all this? And the obvious one, the first one I told you, was all groups, no matter who it was. The group will finally consume itself, whether it be a political party, whatever, unless it gets fresh food, people. And there's nothing weird, mystical about this. It's always been known. You've had in this century, I think it was President of General Motors or somebody, said, grow or die. That was his motto, and nobody seemed to remember or notice that there were great Roman philosophers saying that same thing in Latin and Greek 2,500 years ago. But now they take it as being a group phenomenon, which it is what he was referring to, that a business cannot stand still. A group will eat itself up, a group of people. And on top of all that, I wanted to point out, since I brought it up to you people, that that's the main reason you're here. As I turned over them, I was threatening to close up operations here. And I've gone through this before, and I just said, you've got to get in some fresh people, and I left it to them. Besides this happening with any group, I want to point out something else. For a group to stay together, how does it normally, if it doesn't grow in any great manner, that you've got some little church on the corner, let's use that. If you will notice, every group of people that try to hold together, assuming they're not experiencing some widespread public popularity, which would be a different story, but just like a little church on the corner, they will continually, and big churches also, but it's just harder to see, it's not that important, but to hold together, they must continually have some sort of activity. It is known, it used to be known, I think, in some quarters, and I'm going to steal it, as busy work. The most common with religious organizations, churches, is a building fund. That it's constantly that we've got to get new quarters. We're going to have to expand the church. We're going to have to expand, we're going to have to get new facilities. We need to gold plate the altar. We need to get new carpet here, more in line with people of our position and our aspirations in life. It amounts to busy work. There's no end to it. It helps hold the group together. It is, without it, groups will not really stay together. People will not continue to meet, even if it was the Charlotte Bird Watching, Blue Jay Watchers Society. They have to do something. And of course, the obvious one you'd think, well, periodically they surely get their binoculars and go out and look for blue jays. They could, but after a certain length of time, like everything, it begins to wear down, and it could be that started off, and at one time, 10 years ago, they had 30 members join up and started, and now it's down to maybe 4 people. They continue to meet. Do you understand that there's hardly any chance that they ever get out binoculars and go look for blue jays? They now meet, it's just simply a social occasion. The 4 of them, they're now old friends, and they just meet. They continue to meet every Saturday, and they may go through a procedure about, well, would you read the minutes of the last meeting? And the secretary says, well, we met at such and such time, we just decided to read the minutes, was there new business, and there wasn't. We retired and had coffee and talked about, and had the public, had individual discussions. All it is now a facade, nothing wrong with it, to get together every Saturday or whenever with a little social occasion. If it was going to have any activity, there would have to be, or if the group was going to have any vitality of its own, it has to, in a sense, grow. It cannot just continue to lose members. But even if it holds its own and has anything other than a social function, there has to be the appearance. There has to be some common activity, and it always ends up busy work. None of your faces seemed to light it up when I said building fund. I assume, I'm just assuming all of you, because it's true in every religion. And I was then beginning to wonder, all of you are becoming deadpan or holding back, or maybe none of you had ever been around religion in the West. But every church, Catholic, Jew, everything out there, they're involved with some sort of busy work right this minute. The building fund is the most common, but it can be other things. They're trying to expand their outreach program. They will buy new buses to go out and pick up unwitting children on Sunday morning and drag them to church. Or that they want to enlarge the kitchen so that they can make more donuts and entice the little nippers to show up. Or, but the point is, it's always something. I'm not making fun of it. It's always something that we've got to be doing, folks. It's always things. So keep charts like it's the building fund. I just use that as archetypical. That we're getting closer. And you could pop in and see them and pop back 20 years later. And they'll be over here, it'll be a new chart. And you go back and they've now got a building that's twice as beautiful, twice as big as when you saw them 20 years or 10 years ago. And you think, what the hell are they doing? It's beautiful. But they're going, nope, we've got to have a new one. And it goes on and on and on. It is busy work. Can any of you consider that if you stay at the ordinary level of consciousness, that you've got about 70 years that life gives you of busy work that holds you together? It holds what appears to be a man's mind, and usually you probably think of it as your individual personality, but it comes from up here. Because without this, you've got no personality. We've been through that. If you win a free lobotomy, or if you get in an accident, if you're rendered comatose, except in severe cases, there will be, except in extreme cases, there will be a noticeable lack of personality. Now, I agree with you. I've met some accountants, and it's hard to tell. No offense to accountants. But you understand, if you're rendered unconscious, your charm, your wit, your personality, shall we go ahead and say it, is almost extinct. I mean, your friends and family may show up there at the hospital room as long as you can afford to keep them on the life support, and they may come by and look at you and say, well, it's still him. And he's putting on a little weight and getting bed sores, but nobody will say a word. You've got no personality. Without this, there is no personality. Can you consider that if you go along with the way your mind is working now, you have literally to hold you together as a group, you individually, to hold you together, that you make it through these 70 years, you and everyone else. Life provides you with just a non-stop, from a certain view, kind of ridiculous busy work. Now, I'm not saying you should change. Remember that. This is no sermon. But that's what it amounts to. And people know it. They just can't face up to it because there is no alternative, and plus, it doesn't bother them that much. But that's the old thing. It hovers around the edges of religion. The religions don't really push it because it would drive people away, but it's the whole idea about you should not be laying up your treasures here on earth, I guess I'm back to the Bible, but in heaven. That is, your possessions, your great books, your new Mercedes, And when you die, your Mercedes is not going, commit Harry Carey and go in the grave with you. Possessions are nothing. Don't waste your time, all that kind of story. And once a week on Saturday or Sunday or Tuesday, whenever people go, they go, how true, and then they go out and get in their car. It's not that they should change, but there is that knowledge that anything that you do in life, ordinarily, is busy work. That is, insofar, I'm not saying it's not fun to have a Mercedes and fun to drive, but the idea is everyone should know that if I just had a Corvette, if I just had this and that, I would then be sexually irresistible. My friends would love me. I would be much better off. And sure as hell, if you ever get one, it took some effort. It is just, I mean, it's more fun than you deserve to have for what, a week? How about maybe 3 weeks until that first payment? $1,200 a month comes in. And suddenly it's everybody that you know. You've driven to every house. You've driven out 2 states away to everybody that you used to know just so you could casually drive by them and say, is that you? And of course, and then it just kind of, like everything else, it will not feed what they used to call a man's spirit. It will not do anything to this. Now, we're not even talking about being more conscious. I'm just talking about the ordinary level. So you end up, if you live as life has you living now internally, nothing wrong with it. Remember, this is no sermon. I'm not saying you should change, but I'm going to tell you how things are. That's all I'm in charge of right now. This is busy work. But without it, you wouldn't hold together. You would go to pieces. You would no longer be a group. You would not be the Charlotte Blue Jay Watcher Society. You would not be the storefront Baptist church down here. For those groups to stay together, for any organization to stay together that's operating up here, to any degree, which if you're verbal, to some degree it's here. If it's a sex maniacs club, to some degree, this is involved. But it is busy work. That is what holds you together in the same way that those churches, these organizations that have that internally there is no extraordinary nourishment available. It becomes usually, as I say, just a social organization, which is what religion is to most people. It's what politics is to most. It's just, do not underestimate the need for people to be drawn together in packs and somebody apparently be in charge. It's just a social time. But those groups, they even have the appearance that they have any vitality to them. They have got to have some kind of project going on continually. But it amounts to busy work, because the question would be if indeed, let's say churches, that religions are actually involved in trying to nourish a man's spirit, as they call it. But this, what in the goddamn hell, pardon it, I'm trying to make, does a building have to do with it? Except you're not used to looking at it that way, and I'm not picking on them, but it's a simple question that you could go up and ask the Pope or the head rabbi of the world, if there was one, to go up and go, are you in charge? I've always had this hunger. I want to, and they go, yes, that's exactly it. You came to the right place. And you go, well, by the way, what does this building have to do with it? How come you spent billions of dollars? I mean, you got to spend on something. I'm not picking on it. But you understand, then to get involved, and they say the main thing we got to get there and sell those donuts next week to raise some more money for the building fund. And you think, well, it's all right. We need to be indoors. I don't want it to rain on me when I show up for a meeting. But what the hell does that have to do with this? And obviously nothing. But if you take that away, what have they got left? Nothing. Now, back to you individually. You got 70 years, if you're ordinary. And what do you stay involved with? A never-ending building fund. Busy work. I'll work my way up. First, I'll get a Beamer. Then I'll trade in on a Mercedes. And then, there's always something. Now I'll get a hair transplant. Then I'll find a better-looking man or woman. Now I'll move to a new condo. Nothing wrong with it. But it's busy work. And it holds people together. And it has nothing to do with this. Nothing. And everybody knows it. I'm going to let you go. Even after I threatened. It was pointed out to me that last time I overran for 5 or 10 minutes. And sure enough, my prediction came true. Several of the older people in the group just said, did you notice that some of them are really getting itchy again? After 5 minutes, just see, that's what suggestion does for you. All right, I'm going to stop after an hour because most people, when they start, cannot handle more than an hour. And you never heard that before. So you heard it from me. I'm the one that puts it out. Then the first time we meet, I go an hour and 10 minutes, and sure as hell, the last 10 minutes you get itchy. Never underestimate the power to be hypnotized. And not by me. No, I don't want you. No, I mean, if you can be hypnotized, what the hell am I going to do with you? Trust me, I got all the hobbies I need. I do not need you. But I'm telling you, people, that's one of the dangers of saying, well, here's what it is. I'm going ahead and reveal I am actually a holdover of such and such Sufi lodge, and I am here I'm going to describe it to you in much detail. It's a combination of the kind of Sufi and the Buddhist, and I make up some new word. And I say, I'm going to describe it to you. Sure as hell, you'd begin to think, I'm getting it, I'm getting it. I understand it, but it's busy work.